There is a moment in every long love story where the world stops pretending it does not already know. And for Baris Arduc and Elcin Sangu, that moment did not arrive quietly. It arrived like the final scene of a drama that millions of people had been watching for years, holding their breath, waiting for the two leads to finally stop running from each other and just stand still. But here is what nobody expected. The ending was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was private, intimate, and almost heartbreakingly simple for two people who had spent the better part of a decade living their love story in full view of an entire nation. So how did we get here? How do two of Turkey's most beloved actors go from persistent rumors and public denials to one of the most talked about weddings in Turkish entertainment history? And what does the real story behind their relationship tell us about the price of being famous and in love at the same time? Sit with this for a moment, because this is not just a celebrity love story. This is a story about patience, about the strange cruelty of public attention, and about two people who chose each other quietly, again and again, until they finally chose each other out loud. Baris Arduc was already a name people knew before most of the world caught on. Born in Istanbul in 1989, he built his early career through a combination of striking screen presence and genuine craft. He was not the kind of actor who arrived fully formed and immediately dominant. He worked his way up, took the roles that were available, and waited for the one that would change everything. That role came in 2013 with the series Medcezir, the Turkish adaptation of the American drama The O.C. playing Kareem, a character who occupied that compelling space between charm and moral ambiguity. Baris became a household name almost overnight. Turkish audiences are enormously loyal to their television stars, and once they decided they loved him, that love did not waver. Elçin Sangu had her own journey running parallel to his, though their paths had not yet crossed in any meaningful way. Born in 1985, she had been building a serious acting career through stage work and television appearances for years before mainstream fame arrived. She was known among industry insiders as someone who brought something real to every role she took. Thoughtful, precise, quietly magnetic in a way that cameras seemed to understand even when audiences had not yet fully noticed. Her breakthrough came through a combination of strong television roles and an undeniable presence that distinguished her from the wave of younger actresses entering the industry at the same time. By the time Baris was becoming a household name through Medcezir, Elçin was already an established figure in Turkish entertainment with her own devoted following. These were two people moving through the same industry, accumulating their own separate stories, carrying their own separate reputations. And then the universe, or perhaps a casting director, decided to put them in the same room. The project that would reportedly bring them together was not one of their most high-profile works individually, but it mattered enormously for what it set in motion off-screen. When you spend long days and late nights working closely with another person, building fictional emotional intimacy, and then stepping back into real life and doing it again the next day, the lines between performance and reality can shift in ways that are difficult to explain and even more difficult to deny. Nobody confirmed anything at first. Of course they did not. In Turkish celebrity culture, as in entertainment industries everywhere, actors who are co-stars face an impossible double standard. Admit to a relationship and suddenly every scene you share is scrutinized differently, every professional moment becomes personal gossip, and the work you spent years building gets reduced to a footnote beneath your romantic life. Deny everything and you maintain control, but at the cost of living inside a permanent half-truth. So the early years of what fans and media were already calling something real played out in the familiar language of celebrity ambiguity. Photographs appeared. Nothing confirmatory, but nothing deniable either. A shared location, a similar schedule, the kind of small digital coincidences that audiences trained by years of celebrity culture have learned to read like a second language. Turkish fans, particularly the deeply passionate communities that form around beloved actors on social media, began assembling these fragments with the dedication of investigators. Timestamps were cross-referenced. Backgrounds were analyzed. Comments were dissected for coded meaning. The community that formed around the possibility of Baris and Elcin as a couple developed its own vocabulary, its own shorthand, its own emotional investment in an outcome that had not yet been declared. And here is where the story becomes genuinely interesting, because what was unfolding was not just a romance. It was a public negotiation between two private people and the audience that felt entitled to know everything about them. That tension is real and it matters, because how they navigated it reveals something about who they both are. Neither of them is the kind of person who courts attention for its own sake. Watch their public appearances from this period and you notice something consistent. They are warm with audiences, genuinely gracious with fans, professional in interviews. But there is a line they both seem to understand instinctively, a point beyond which they do not go, a part of themselves they have always kept for themselves alone. That instinct probably served them well. Because when you are two public figures and the entire internet has decided you are in love, the scrutiny is not gentle. It is constant and consuming and occasionally cruel. People who had never met either of them felt qualified to offer opinions on whether their connection was real, whether it would last, whether one of them deserved the other. The parasocial investment that audiences make in celebrity relationships can feel like love from the inside, but it often manifests as pressure, expectation, and a sense of ownership that no one actually has the right to exercise. Through all of this, Baris and Elcin continued building their careers. Both continued to take on work that demonstrated range and commitment to their craft. Baris in particular had a string of projects through the mid and late part of the decade that cemented his position among the most sought-after leading men in Turkish television. Elcin's work during the same period earned her critical respect that went beyond popularity into genuine industry recognition. And still the relationship question hovered, unanswered, over every profile, every interview, every awards ceremony photograph. The turning point in terms of public acknowledgement did not happen through a press release or a formal statement. It happened the way most real things happen, gradually and then all at once. Appearances together that could no longer be described as coincidental. A shift in the energy of their public presence when they occupied the same space. The quiet, unmistakable body language of two people who have stopped pretending to be strangers to each other's gravity. By the time both of them had effectively confirmed the relationship through the accumulation of public evidence rather than any single explicit statement, the reaction was enormous. Not because anyone was truly surprised. The reaction was enormous because confirmation, after years of wondering, carries its own emotional weight. There is relief in it. There is a strange kind of joy in being right about something you wanted to be real. The fan communities that had spent years assembling circumstantial evidence experienced something that looked, from the outside, remarkably like vindication. Tribute videos were compiled. Timelines were constructed. Every old photograph suddenly existed in a new context that made it feel both inevitable and romantic. But here is the thing about love stories that play out in public. The version the audience experiences is always a construction. It is made of selected moments and public appearances and things that were allowed to be seen. The actual relationship, the real day-to-day reality of two people building a life together through work pressures and public expectations, and the ordinary difficulties that every couple navigates, that story belongs only to them. What we can say with confidence is that whatever was being built between Baris Arduc and Elcin Sangu during those years of public ambiguity appeared, from every available evidence, to be something serious. Something that outlasted the initial excitement of new connection and settled into the deeper, quieter territory of genuine partnership. That depth is what makes the eventual news of their engagement and marriage land with such particular emotional resonance. This was not a whirlwind. This was not a sudden decision made in the heat of fresh feeling. This was two people who had, by all available evidence, spent years learning each other, choosing each other, and deciding that what they had was worth protecting and eventually worth celebrating. The engagement, when it was reported, was received with an outpouring of genuine warmth that cut across the usual cynicism that surrounds celebrity news. Even outlets and commentators who typically approach entertainment stories with detachment seemed to find something affecting in this particular announcement. Perhaps because the patience of it resonated. In an era when everything moves fast and celebrity relationships seem to combust with equal speed in both directions, a love story that had apparently been growing quietly and steadily for years carries a kind of counter-cultural weight. The wedding itself, consistent with everything that had come before it, was not a spectacle designed for maximum media coverage. Reports described an intimate celebration, the details of which remained largely private. And if that sounds anticlimactic for a story that had generated years of public fascination, consider what it actually says. Two people who could have monetized every step of their relationship, who could have sold access to their most personal moments to a media landscape hungry for exactly that kind of content, chose instead to keep the most important day of their lives for themselves and the people they actually love. In the attention economy, that is not a small decision. It is a statement. The response from the Turkish entertainment industry was immediate and genuinely affectionate. Colleagues offered congratulations with the warmth of people who had known both of them for years and perhaps had their own sense of how long this moment had been coming. Industry figures who rarely engage with celebrity relationship news made exceptions. It was the kind of response that suggested the marriage was not just popular among fans, but respected among peers. On social media, the reaction transcended the Turkish-speaking audience entirely. International fans of Turkish television, a community that has grown substantially over the past decade as Turkish drama has found global audiences through streaming platforms, participated in the celebration with the same energy as domestic fans. Baris and Elçin, as individual actors, had admirers across multiple continents. Their union became a moment that briefly connected those far-flung communities around a shared feeling of happiness for two people they had never met. There is something worth pausing on in that dynamic. The global reach of Turkish television has created a genuinely international fan culture, one that is sometimes dismissed by serious critics, but represents something real about the power of storytelling that crosses language barriers and cultural contexts. When people in countries thousands of miles from Istanbul feel moved by the personal lives of Turkish actors, it speaks to something universal in the stories that Turkish drama tells about love, family, loyalty, and the cost of ambition. Baris and Elçin, as individual performers, have both contributed to that global reach. Their work is part of the reason audiences outside Turkey began paying attention in the first place. So the celebration of their marriage carried, for that international audience, a thread of personal gratitude as well as genuine affection. Back in Turkey, the coverage was extensive and largely generous. Entertainment media that had spent years speculating about the relationship now had confirmation to work with, and they approached it, for the most part, with the kind of warmth that long-standing familiarity produces. These were not outsiders observing strangers. These were journalists and commentators who had been covering both actors for the better part of their adult careers. The marriage felt, in that context, like the conclusion of a story many of them had watched develop in real time. What none of that coverage could fully capture, of course, is the private reality behind the public narrative. We know the outline. We know the timeline as it was visible from outside. We know the professional accomplishments and the public appearances and the gradual shift from rumor to confirmation to celebration. What we do not know, and what is not ours to know, is the actual texture of their relationship. The arguments, the doubts, the private jokes, the moments of grace, and the moments of difficulty that every real relationship contains in roughly equal measure. That mystery is appropriate. It is, in fact, the healthiest possible outcome for two people who navigated enormous public interest with extraordinary dignity. They gave the audience enough to feel connected without ever surrendering the core of what they were building together. That is a difficult balance to maintain over years of persistent scrutiny, and the fact that they apparently managed it says something about both of their characters. There is also something worth noting about what their story, as we can observe it from the outside, models for a younger generation of public figures navigating the same impossible demands. In a media landscape that rewards oversharing and treats privacy as suspicious, Baris and Elçin demonstrated that it is possible to be genuinely beloved by an audience while keeping the most important parts of your life protected. That is not evasion. That is wisdom. The professional trajectories of both actors continue beyond this personal milestone, of course. Marriage is a beginning, not a conclusion. Both Baris and Elçin have careers that show no sign of slowing, audiences who remain deeply invested in their work, and presumably a long creative future ahead of them individually and whatever collaborations their shared life might eventually produce. But there is a reason this particular chapter in their story captured so much attention and generated so much genuine feeling. Love stories, even observed from a distance, even filtered through the distortions of celebrity culture and media coverage and fan projection, connect us to something we all recognize: the patience of waiting for the right moment. The courage of committing to another person in a world that makes very few things permanent. The particular tenderness of two people who chose each other slowly and then finally completely. Baris Arduc and Elcin Sangu did not give us a fairy tale. They gave us something more interesting and ultimately more moving. They gave us evidence that real love, the kind that grows in the difficult space between public exposure and private protection, is still possible. That two people can build something genuine even when half the world is watching and the other half is speculating. The years of rumors were never really about the rumors. They were about an audience recognizing something worth rooting for and not wanting to be wrong. The wedding was never really about the wedding. It was about the confirmation of something that had been true for a long time, finally allowed to stand in the light. And standing in that light, after everything, they look exactly like what they always were. Two people who found each other, held on, and decided that what they had was worth keeping forever. What do you think? Let us know in the comments.